Good afternoon. This is Bart Vansevenant with RightCrowd. Welcome to this RightCrowd session as part of the fantastic Convergint Insight event here today. Welcome to this session, and what we'll cover in this one is we're going to talk about the impact that the pandemic has on the physical access control space that we're all familiar with. We'll look at a couple of the consequences of that and how that impacts how we manage and handle. Good afternoon.
No, it's still saying that the stream has ended. So I need Jacqueline to reset it on my side. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we are live now.
Good. Can I go ahead?
Yep, go ahead.
Good. Sorry for this short hiccup. My name is Bart Vansevenant with RightCrowd. Welcome to this RightCrowd session as part of the Convergent Insight event. Let's dive right in. What we're going to do in this session is we're going to look at the impact that the pandemic has had on the physical access control space. And what I want to focus on is two pieces of impact that we believe will be lasting. So that means they changed, but they will continue to remain in place for years to come. And the first impact we've seen is the way that we've organized work in our organizations. With putting aside a couple of exceptions like healthcare, manufacturing, a couple of verticals where it's been impossible to have people work from home, in the vast majority of verticals and customers that we've been working with, we've seen that people have been asked to work from home, very often on a permanent basis. And what we're seeing is that a lot of organizations have decided to remain that new fashion of working also in the future. There was a recent Gartner survey conducted in December last year. And in that survey, the respondents told Gartner that they expect, or that their intention is to have 80% of the people that have been working from home during the pandemic, that they will be allowed to continue to work from home, at least on a part-time basis. And 47% of those organizations actually plan to allow those people to work from home on a continuous basis. And as you can imagine, that has a major impact on how we organize the workplace. First of all, we can expect that the total surface, the sort of amount of real estate space that we have as organizations is going to decrease, but the space that we will continue to use will have to change. It will look differently. So we'll be more focused on things like collaboration. So that's one important change, which will impact and will have to impact how we organize physical access control. And I'll talk more about that in the next couple of slides. And a second big lasting change we've seen as a consequence of the pandemic is how organizations look at health and safety. In the past, you had physical security on the one hand, and then health and safety on the other hand. And in some verticals, like, for example, mining and oil and gas, health and safety was very important, but in quite a few other verticals, health and safety was deemed less important than physical security, and for sure dealt with separately. We've seen, and we think that this is a lasting change, that health and safety and physical security are going to come closer together, for the simple reason that some of the controls that we've put in place for physical access control can actually be leveraged and should be integrated with controls related to health and safety. So these are two very important changes that are here to stay and that are going to require us to look differently at physical access control. First important thing we need to rethink in the context of physical access control is that in the past, when we thought about controls that we put in place, that they were all about security. How do we prevent unauthorized access to the facilities? That was like the focus of physical security. With the changes that we've just covered, we believe that the controls you put in place should not only fit the security requirements, but also take into account health, safety, and compliance requirements. And furthermore, we also think that some of these controls will be helpful and will need to support more collaborative workspace. Because as you can imagine, if you have people coming into the office less frequently, the times that they will go into the office, it will be with the goal to collaborate, to meet other people, to be together, to sort of discuss certain items and the like. So that's a first important impact, not just about security, but broader than that. And the second important consequence of what we just discussed is how we do physical access control. And what I want to do in the next few minutes is first give you a clear description of how physical access control is being implemented in most organizations today. And I think you'll recognize how I'll explain that. And after that, we'll take a side step to the logical access control space. And we'll look at how logical access control has been organized and evolved over the last decade. Because you'll see there's a couple of very new concepts that were introduced there that I think we can learn from in the physical access control space. But let's start with what physical access control looks like today. Most organizations, and you may be one of them, have in the past bought one of those physical access control systems. Some of the names you'll recognize, you have Lenel, you have Honeywell, Genetec, Tyco, Secure 9000, and the like. Those systems have been put in place. And in a lot of organizations, those systems are run as an isolated, almost standalone system. And the only integration that we typically see, mostly in large organizations, is a link and integration with Active Directory or HR systems. And the reason for that integration is simply having a feed of employees, staff flowing into that physical access control system. But other than that, we see very limited integration with anything else. And that will definitely have to change. And we'll talk more about that. If you want to include safety, if you want to include health, you'll have to integrate with other systems as well. And the second important thing that we see in physical access control systems as they exist today is the method that is used to manage the access, to grant permissions, is based on the fairly old mechanism of access control list, ACLs, as it's often referred to. And an ACL is very simple. I take an example, John Smith. John Smith works in the organization. He's, for example, part of the sales organization. And given that John needs access to certain parts of the facility, certain buildings, certain places within that building, and what an ACL does is it simply says, John Smith, here's his credential, and it is a list of sort of resources, in this case, doors or zones that John has access to. And an access control list is typically defined once, and then over time, maybe occasionally, you'll see a change to that list. In the case of this example, if at some point John would change roles, move from sales to, for example, professional services, at that point, you would go into the access control system, change the level of access that is needed, and that's it. And then if at some point John would leave the organization, then hopefully there's some either automated or semi-automated process that would take care of the fact that John left the organization, flagged in HR, and then it flows through access control and he's removed from the access control system. But that is about it. So it's a fairly static sort of way of managing the access. And we believe that that is going to have to change. But before we go into what we believe physical access control 2.0, as we call it, will look like, we'll take that sidestep to logical access control. For those of you who are familiar with logical access control, you may recognize some of these terms. And the first one I want to briefly touch on is the concept of zero trust. And if you're not familiar with it, I would really recommend taking 15 minutes to learn about it. Just Google zero trust. You can add Forrester research because it's a concept that was authored by an analyst of Forrester Research at the time. And the zero trust concept is, if I sort of summarize it in a nutshell, it basically says you do not trust anything or anyone, whether it's to access the perimeter or outside of the perimeter, doesn't matter. And you always are first going to verify a number of things before you allow access. So by definition, no trust, nothing, no, never. So whenever someone requests or resource requests access, you're going to verify a couple of things at that point in time and then grant access. That's the zero trust concept. And if you think about the physical access control space as it's changing, if you have out of your population a large group of people that works from home every single day, and they do come into the office, for example, once every 2 weeks, then why would you give them an access badge that gives them access to your facility every single day? That is a security risk. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to that. Second principle that is very well known in logical access control and should be known also in physical access control, because it's one of the base principles of security overall, is least privilege. Least privilege, very simple. People should have the access that is needed for their job, not more than that. And then the last one, and this is a very, very interesting and important one, is in logical access control, we've seen an evolution. It also started with access control list. Then it evolved in what is known as role-based access control. And over the last couple of years, we've seen the evolution or change towards attribute-based access control, also called policy-based access control. And very interesting to look at how that is different from access control list. In an access control list, as I explained, John Smith, at some point in time, you're going to define directly into the system, he has access to resources A, B, C, in this case, to these doors or these zones within the building. With attribute-based access control, you're not going to do that. What you're going to do is you're going to define policies. And a policy could look, and it's going to take into account a number of attributes. An example, you could say, access to this particular building is going to be granted to people that are part of the sales department that have the right level of health checks that were done, given that we're still in the COVID-19 area, that are based in this particular country, as an example, based on the geography. So you define a couple of attributes, and if based on those attributes, a person sort of meets those requirements, then access is granted. If you don't meet them, the access is not granted. So it's a dynamic way. So you do not have to define upfront whether or not John has access to the building. You simply define this policy, and then if John tries to access, it'll basically flow through the policy, and if he meets the requirements, he has access. So there's no default access, but the attribute-based access control rules will define whether or not you're allowed. And we believe that if you start combining security requirements, but also health checks you want to do, certain safety requirements, checking whether someone has done a certain training or has a certain certification, that attributes-based access control is a much better way to manage access control in our organizations. So let's have a look at what that then means if we apply it to physical access control, as we call it, physical access control 2.0. And this is the slide we're looking at, is the RightCrowd Products strategy slide we use internally at RightCrowd. So I'll use this to explain what that new form of access control will look like. At the top of the slide, you see the different business systems that most of you will have deployed in your organizations. You have Active Directory, you have an HR system, you may have SAP or Oracle as a business system. You can have learning management systems in which you keep track of which trainings people have followed, which certifications they hold, and the like. And what we're going to do is we're going to put between those business systems and your physical access control system, we're going to put that middle layer that on the slide says RightCrowd Rules and Workflow Engine. And that sort of middleware is going to allow you to implement a form of attribute-based access and presence control in your organization. In this middleware, you're going to define these types of rules. So rather than directly put into the access control system which doors that John should be able to access, you're going to define these different rules in that middle layer, and those rules are automatically going to push or create the right access in the underlying system. So if John is part of the sales organization and you have a policy that says people that are part of the sales organization that have gone through these trainings that are located in this country, those people have access to these and these resources, then automatically John is going to receive the right level of access. And if John tomorrow changes to a different department, becomes part of the professional services team, then another policy is going to apply to him, and automatically his access will be adjusted to whatever the right access is for him at that point in time. So that's a first important change we expect. Those types of more intelligent ways, dynamic ways of managing and automating your access control will be put in place in organizations. Makes it very easy to also apply these health and safety related rules in addition to physical security rules. And a second change we expect, and we already see in the market, is the change from what we call static or passive credentials. Think of these access badges, towards active credentials. And to briefly explain the difference, these badges have evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years. The last type of badges, look at Desfire, look at HID CEOS cards. They're very, very secure cards. On the inside, advanced cryptography, all you want, but they're still very passive credentials. And what do I mean by that? This card does nothing unless it's in the magnetic field of a door reader. That's when it does its magic. But other than that, you don't know anything. So it does pure access control, a point-in-time check when you present this to a reader. If you look at those active credentials that are now available either in the form of phone applications or security wearables like I'm wearing here, this digital badge holder is an example of that. These active credentials can do way more. And by the way, this one leverages your existing badge. Just slide in your existing badge to authenticate, and then it becomes an active credential. The advantage of these active credentials is that they're continuously there. They continuously emit a signal, which can be picked up by phones, by little devices in your infrastructure, which we call gateways. And that changes this from an access control credential, that point in time, once every so many minutes or hours, you'll know where someone is, to what we call presence control. You will continuously know who's in the building, who's on that particular floor. You can also start enforcing these access control rules into presence control rules. Simple example, a visitor is supposed to be in the building for 2 hours. With access control, you know when the person entered, but you don't know whether the person is still in the building or where the person is, etc. With presence control, with an active credential, you know when they entered, but then continuously you'll know where that person is. Is that person still in the building? And after 2 hours, you can send a signal to the security wearable in this example to give a signal to the visitor like, hey, your time expired, and you can make that visible to people around and so on. So that's a simple example of what physical access control 2.0 will look like. If we translate that briefly into what RightCrowd offers to move organizations from the existing access control 1.0, if you want to call it that way, to 2.0, we do that in the form of 3 different products, and you can implement all at once, or you can gradually sort of move towards that 2.0 model. The first product we offer is called RightCrowd Access Analytics. And that is a product that really gives you insight into what your access control looks like today. Imagine that you're a global enterprise, you have physical access control systems, maybe different ones across the globe. This product is going to pull from all of those systems, all of the people, all of their access rights, and it allows you to define simple rules, simple policies that are going to be validated. Are those policies respected in what we see actually enforced in your physical access control system? The simplest possible example, people that are no longer on the payroll should not have access. Very simple, very straightforward. This is one simple default rule in this product. It will automatically compare what we know from Active Directory or HR with all of the access provisioned in the systems, and it will flag you if we find people that are no longer supposed to be part of the organization and still have access. Of course, much more advanced rules can be defined there. Secondly, we have RightCrowd Workforce Management, and that is really that middleware that I briefly touched on. So this is the layer that is going to automate, link those business systems with your physical access control systems, allow you to define rules, workflows to implement that attribute-based access control that we explained. And then lastly, we have RightCrowd Presence Control. That is the business where we deliver security wearables, as we call it. So these active credentials that still leverage the badges that you have today. You literally insert them into these wearables. They will be used to sort of authenticate who is the user, but then they become that active credential that can be used for both access and presence control on a continuous basis. If we then look at a sort of translation, how does all of that then get implemented on a day-to-day basis as part of that physical access control 2.0 concept? So this is what it typically would look like. And take into account the situation that we're in today. We've had a pandemic. The pandemic is still out there. We still have a number of checks we want to do on a regular basis. We are in that new situation where we don't expect everyone to come to work every single day. So we're going to have some sort of a process to manage who can come to the office when. So what this could look like is this. Before someone goes to work, imagine that everyone in the morning checks an app on their smartphone. First thing they may do is, hey, I want to go to work today. I have a simple request that is being sent. Request to go to the office, select your office, that's it. In the back end, you can have rules that say, I automatically approve that because I know this is a person who normally comes to this office and I still have capacity, or it could be a simple workflow that does a check, someone approves that that person can come to work. Second thing that may happen, you may want that person to, for example, every other day, fill out a simple health questionnaire, a couple of questions related to COVID-19 to check whether everything's all right with that person. Same thing in the app, it has a little pop-up saying, hey, it's time for your health questionnaire. You click on it, you fill it out, automatically sent to the backend, pass or fail. And depending on that, you may either enable access for that particular day, not just forever, but access for the day for that person, for the place or the location where that person is going to go to that day. You can also use that same application, the app on the smartphone, to push other notifications, safety and health updates, anything like that. Then someone arrives at work, and think of a couple of typical processes that we can fully automate when people arrive at work. Example of visitors. With visitors, you can create a solution whereby visitors request a visit is reviewed, approved, they receive a QR code, they arrive, they sort of can present that to a kiosk, a badge is issued, badge can be inserted into that active wearable, that security wearable. When the host comes to pick up the visitor, we can enforce something called tethering, which is really a host visitor sort of escort policy that is really enforced through technology. How does that work? The host picks up one or more of their visitors, clicks on the smartphone, they're all linked to it. If the visitor at some point, one of them would leave the group, the visitors gets notified through the wearable, the host gets a notification, and a security guard might get an alert saying, hey, go and look for this visitor. Employees may arrive at the office, and we're all familiar with that. One out of so many people forget their badge. Simple automated process. I log in with my Active Directory credential, and a new badge gets dispensed for me, which is valid for a couple of hours. Can also enforce random screening, fitness for work, all of those things. Then throughout the day, these security wearables that we spoke about can be used for social distancing and contact tracing. When I come too close to someone else, the device is going to first warn me, a yellow blinking light saying, be careful, you're coming too close. If I would stay too close, it switches to red blinking. That event gets saved, so it gets sent to the backend, and we have a portal interface where you can see all of the close contacts, as they're called. You can do analysis. If someone reports being infected by COVID-19, you can immediately look up who are all the people that have been in close contact with that person, how long did that take, where did that happen, things like that. That presence control, knowing every single day who was in the building, when did they arrive, all of that information is available thanks to the fact that you use active credentials. You also have a form of visually authorizing. If you have all of these checks that happened in advance, this device can, by means of a simple color, green or any other color you select, gives you that visual reassurance. You know, I see that color, all of the checks have been met. If one of the checks has not been met, the device may indicate that by, for example, a red blinking light. Same technology can also be used for evacuation. Most organizations today have very manual ways of doing evacuation, checklists and the like. With this technology, fully automated, the evacuation alarm goes off, people leave the building. At the mustering points, everyone is automatically checked into the mustering zone, and you have reporting that tells you who arrived at which mustering point, who's still in the building, where and when have we last seen them. And then all sorts of processes that can be fully automated: onboarding, offboarding, access requests, changes in access, approvals, how you deal with contractors. So a lot of sort of automation that comes with it. To wrap up, just a couple of screenshots that show what some of these things look like in our product. And this is a screenshot of the app we have on the smartphone showing your daily health screening, the close contacts you had. In the background, you can see the portal showing the results of those health questionnaires. The next screen is going to show you some of that presence reporting, knowing for that location, for that day, who was in the office, how many people. You can validate that against occupancy. Where have those people been throughout the day? And then a couple of screenshots on contact tracing. So knowing who's been close to whom, for how long, where did that happen, who came in touch with whom, etc. So I know we started a couple of minutes late because of a small hiccup, but in summary, what we try to cover in the session is looking at a couple of the lasting impacts or changes caused by the pandemic, how that forces us to rethink a couple of things in physical access control. We looked at a couple of concepts from logical access control, which we believe we can implement also in physical access control, key one being attribute-based access control. And we had a quick snapshot of how RightCrowd allows you to make that sort of move from traditional access control to that access control 2.0 through a couple of products. If you would be interested to learn more about this, see demonstrations of these, don't hesitate to reach out to us at RightCrowd. Here's my contact details. This is my email address. Feel free to send me a quick email and I'll put you in touch with the right person. I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to join this session, and I wish you a good and fruitful continuation of this Convergint Insight event. Thank you very much.